Gallant's warnings went unheeded. Göring refused to listen. Fighter production lagged behind demand, and Gallant's fellow pilots grew increasingly bitter as they found themselves outnumbered in the air.
By the middle of the war, Hermann Göring, who was, for all his despicableness, was actually a pretty intelligent guy. He realized that the writing was on the wall and that Germany was probably going to lose the war. So after being discredited so badly by the Luftwaffe's failures at the Battle of Britain and Stalingrad and the Tunis Air Bridge, he kind of retired. He was still nominally the head of the Luftwaffe, but he basically went into seclusion at Karen Hall. And that caused all kinds of problems because he still was a decision maker. And Galland realized that the only way the Luftwaffe was going to survive was if they increased fighter production immediately. They needed fighters, they needed pilots, they needed to stop the Allied air campaign. Göring refused to listen. He continued to order the production of bombers, especially complicated, raw material-intensive aircraft. And by the crisis point of the war, early 1944, the Germans and their industrial base really had not kept pace with the way the course of the war had gone. Galland was this lone voice crying in the dark, and nobody listened.
In the summer of 1943, the American strategic bombing campaign began in earnest. To stop the B-17s and B-24s, the Reich would rely on 4 main types of fighters, 2 single-engined and 2 twin-engined. The single-engine fighter groups flew either the Messerschmitt Bf-109G or the Focke-Wulf 190A. Both could be formidable opponents for the Allied fighter pilots, as the Americans first discovered in North Africa.
We were in Benghazi doing escort for Stuttgart instead. We were fighting against Spitfire 5 and Hurricanes and P-40s. The Spitfire was more maneuverable, far more than we were. But only we were better in climbing and we could better climb, could out-climb at any time. Then the other thing was we had fuel-injected motors, and they had still carburetor motors. We could do maneuvers which they couldn't do. And P-40s was also a good airplane.
Colonel Fox Raynard, P-40 pilot with the 79th Fighter Group, recalls.
With the P-40 against the 109, the 109 had a higher speed, higher rate of climb, could climb to altitude. We were quite altitude limited with no superchargers. And the one advantage we had over the 109 was that we could outturn them. They could outdive us also, or come close. They were a fine airplane. They a lot of performance. Anytime you were attacked by a 109, about the only thing you could do to keep from getting hit was to get into a tight turn, which he couldn't keep with you. As far as the 190, it was a far better airplane than the 109. As a matter of fact, we had one of each in the fighter group, in the 79th Fighter Group, and I got to fly both of them. The 190 was a Cadillac compared to the 109. It had a nice cockpit, good visibility, had almost a semi-bubble canopy, and all of the instruments and controls were right where they should be. Everything was it was a natural airplane. Good performance. Probably the airplane of the war until the Mustang came along, the Mustang B.
The Bf-109 and FW-190 were designed to be air superiority weapons. Their main purpose, as envisioned in 1939, was to clear the skies of enemy fighters so the Luftwaffe's bombers could do their work. Neither had been built to intercept enemy bombers. When the American B-17s and B-24s began appearing in Europe's skies, both German fighters showed weaknesses in their new role as interceptors. The 109 was sleek and fast, but dainty and not well armed. The G model usually carried only a single 20-millimeter cannon and two 7.9-millimeter machine guns. With such limited firepower, Axis 109 pilots found it very difficult to shoot down American heavy bombers, which were extremely rugged. Worse, the 109G was a relatively fragile aircraft, not capable of taking a lot of battle damage.
In attacking bomber formations, the 109 pilots had to run this gauntlet of defensive fire from the 50 caliber machine guns. And especially in the rear attacks, this fire was devastating and many German pilots lost their lives. The Me-109G proved to be especially frail in these attacks and much inferior to the Me-109F that preceded it. It was less maneuverable. Its armament seemed not up to the task of attacking these heavy bombers. There was a heavy frame cockpit which caused it to have poor visibility. Generally speaking, the German fighter pilots considered it to be an inferior fighter. So the Germans will attempt to modify the Me-109G, which is the most produced variant of the Me-109, by slinging 20-millimeter cannons under the wings and pods, and this increase of armament will, in fact, make it much more effective against the bombers, but it will also lower its performance as a fighter. So when American escorting fighters appear over Germany, the Me-109G will essentially become a sitting duck.
Still, the 109 had speed. At 28,540 feet, the Bf-109G-2, with its liquid-cooled 1,475 horsepower Daimler-Benz engine, could just touch 406 miles per hour. It could also race to altitude quickly, an essential asset for any aircraft used as an interceptor. From sea level, it could climb to 20,000 feet in just over 5 minutes. While it could get to the bombers quickly, the 109 could not loiter. It carried enough fuel to stay aloft for only about an hour and a half. That severely limited German attempts to use mass formations against the American bombers, as they frequently took too much time and fuel to assemble. Even with a 66-gallon drop tank, the 109s had only a 250-mile radius of action. Size was another of the 109's assets. With a length of 29 feet and a wingspan of 32 feet, the Messerschmitt had a narrow fuselage and stubby, narrow wings that made it a difficult target in the air.
And the 109 was a tough adversary. I had one on my tail one time, and I couldn't shake him. I finally did, but they were a good airplane, and almost as good as 51. Not quite, fortunately. We could outturn them, but contrary to what intelligence told us, we could not outdive them. They informed us we could, but at least the one that was after me, I couldn't outdive. I was going full throttle straight down. But they're very comparable, very good airplane.
Where the 109 was fragile and fussy, the Focke-Wulf was lean and tough. Operational by 1941, the FW-190 quickly proved to be far superior to any Allied fighter of the day. At low altitude, it could outrun anything in the air, including the British Spitfire Mark V. With its phenomenal rate of roll, it could flip over into a split S far quicker than its enemies. Focke-Wulf pilots frequently used the split S to escape from stern attacks as a result.